Ándale pues. Finalmente ya podemos. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Welcome one and all to the Shakespeare Show. So, some interesting updates. I was able to go to my local Target and was able to get a Pride banner. Let me see if I can, I was able to get an actual Pride banner because I was like, is the Target by me hog or not hog? Then I saw all of their stuff and I was all like, yes, yes, you know. So, with that being said, happy Pride. Pride is continuous, right? Also, I think it's hilarious how like all of these like right-wing dudes don't understand like one, that the pride that they think of as a sin is not the same type of pride that we're talking about. Like it's it's literally in the Latin you can anyway. Um so I did get this new little like air conditioning thing that I hope will make my room. I don't want to give off too much information, but it gets really hot, and sometimes it makes it very uncomfortable to stream for long periods of time. Which also, I do have a sub goal for each stream. I've mentioned it before, but I have to institute it so because now that I'm out of work because it's summer, this is my only job, I guess, besides researching itself, right? But that doesn't pay off for a long time, years typically. So 5 subs a day if you want a longer stream. I'm willing to stream until 1, or to 2, but if you want to stream past that to like 3 or 4, I need those 5 subs because the stream needs to grow. 1, for positive reasons, right? I hope that people are enjoying it, but 2, also, I do need to be able to pay even the minimal amount that Twitch does give me. Buy food for my puppies, buy food for myself, stuff like that. So, anyways, I'll bring it up later. I have my ads so that they're automatic, at the bottom of the hour and the top of the hour. So, just know that if you're not subbed already. But today I wanted to talk about sects, not anything related to physical intercourse, but actually sects of different things. And for one of them, because we're going to be talking about Jewish sects, I kind of wanted to start off with that one. I think that Sam's video, again, this is before he became like super Zionist, so I feel more okay with watching his video about this, when he talks about like the origins of Christianity. But I think there's another video that specifically goes into the other people who existed prior to Jesus and after Jesus of Nazareth, who were also like really famous for what they did, including other people named Jesus. So that's what we're going to talk about for right now. Again, if you want a longer stream, or if you just want to support me in any way, please do consider gifting a sub, or resubscribing, or subscribing in the first place, even if it's your Twitch Prime or whatever it might be, because trust me, those help. All of that helps. Especially because, again, I have 3 little puppies. But anyway, so let's get down to it.
Rome, 95 CE. The renowned Jewish historian Flavius Josephus has nearly completed work on his magnum opus, The Antiquities of the Jews. In the course of his writing, Josephus begins to describe the decade in which he was born. Judea is a Roman province. The great Sanhedrin has diminished into a puppet of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. In the north...
Okay, so the reason why this is important is remember that Judea, right, or Syria Palestina, as it will be called soon, as it should be called, did not include Galilee. Galilee was essentially a different country, or like a different province. So like the belief, so I'm not trying to play semantics here, but it is interesting because other people, like in Hebrew, you usually refer to Jesus like as Hanusri, right? The Nazarene, I guess, is one way of putting it. Um, because that part of the land is not historically Judea, right? And that's where the term Jew comes from the Hebrew Yehudim, which means Judean. Um, Galilee it was separate, and so essentially when that's why when his parents, Mary and Joseph, um, you know, go to Egypt, right, to escape Herod, you know, that's a different province, has a different governor, etc. But also when they go back to Galilee, technically speaking, that's also under a different government. That's why they can go home and not have to worry about like Herod going after them there. So also, I'm eating some homemade hummus. I made it really lemony because I love lemony hummus. But yeah.
The two remaining Jewish tetrarchies are at war with Nabatea, and losing badly, and violence against Jews is becoming commonplace throughout the empire. In this period, Josephus uncovers the seeds of bloody conflict that would define his own era. But suddenly, Josephus's prose turns away from this entirely to tell a different story. At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good and he was known to be virtuous. Many people among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. A fair warning. This video will discuss the life of Jesus and some of his followers from a strictly Jewish historical perspective, which doesn't necessarily conform to traditional Christian narratives or doctrines as they are taught today.
Like, one thing, again, like, this is why I always say, like, I have nothing against any individual or, like, you know, any person who's religious, but, like, because I am a historian, a cultural historian in particular, it's like, I have to look at it in these ways, right? Like, it's not like oh, I'm doing it for any particular purpose. It's because that's how, you know, those are the tools by which you can, you know, come to discover and interpret history. But one thing that's true is that Josephus, remember, writes about this after it supposedly happened. So that's the thing, is that, like, the stories, like, when Josephus, who was taken to Rome, writes this, because he writes most of these books, most of his works in Rome, right? And he actually, when one of his books, Contra Apion, he specifically is trying to go against the anti-Jewish sentiment that had arisen in Rome. But one important thing to remember is that Josephus was writing this decades after it supposedly happened. After the story, after the earliest possible gospel, which would have been the Gospel of Mark, would have been written in some form. But even then, its earliest forms are not found in one, Hebrew, and also not in any land, and not in Judea, right? They're found in actually southwestern Syria. So again, written in Greek, there was never any Hebrew version of the Gospels. They have always been Greek. So yeah.
This is not intended to insult or disabuse Christian belief, nor to promote it.
Exactly.
But if this video does have an agenda, it's to demonstrate that Jesus and his apostles were much more a product of the Jewish world at that time than most.
Exactly. That's the thing, is that, like, when people want to talk about the historical Jesus, they kind of take him as this exemplary like, oh, no one else like him or around him ever did the same. And that isn't true. In fact, it actually was very common for people to have said, to have done the similar miracles. Again, this is nothing against any particular, belief in Christianity, but when we're looking at it from the completely historical perspective, Yoshua, or Yeshua, if he's sometimes reduced to Joshua, Jesus' name is Joshua, like that's his actual name. Jesus is how the Greeks hear Yoshua, which just means Joshua. And so, like, even that, right? Like, they took a Hebrew name and made it into something specific, right? So now people don't think of Josh when they hear Yeshua. They think of Jesus. And then the other thing was the insertion or the addition of the Greek term Christos, or Christ. That concept does not exist at all in Jewish thought, the idea of Christos, which is why many historians have argued that Marcion, who was an early church father, or was an early church, father, you can put it like that, argued that they should not try to link Christianity so directly to Judaism. Like, he argued that the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible describe two different gods, and that to link them together would be a detriment to Christianity. In essence, that's kind of what his argument was. So, the way we have to look at this is, like, one, Jesus was a product of his time, and not only that, but like the people that will say, in the Talmud it says this about Jesus. The name Yoshua, right, which just means Joshua, was used a lot because that was just a common name at the time, like, because Joshua was seen as a hero, right, like a legendary hero, right, who was able to make the walls of Jericho. Hello, October. Happy Pride. Happy Pride. Oh, October, I forgot to tell you. I went to this cafe in Mexico City, and it's called Las Lunas de Octubre, the moons of October. And it's all like, they have black lattes, right? Like, where they do like the latte art in white, but the latte is black. And it's, oh my gosh. Like, when I was there, I was all like, why is October not here? Why is October not here? I'm like, Shakespeare Con is going to be held in Mexico City because I legit just like want to get an apartment there and just stream every day. And like go to like all of the cute little coffee shops that they have. Like, honestly, that's what I would want to do. But yeah, it was. I know. I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. But I did. I was there, and then there were two more that I wanted to tell you. There's one that I couldn't go to because it was closed that day, but it's a legit like a witchcraft, like it's all witchcraft themed, and not like Harry Potter. I'm talking about like you know what I mean, like they give you like your coffee or whatever in goblets, and it's so cool. It's so cool. So, like, definitely I've noticed that Mexican culture, I think it's because of our like the indigenous cultures as well. We're very like okay with death, right? Like, they're not like, Mexicans are typically not afraid of death. Hence why we have like Dia de los Muertos and stuff like that. That's why something like, like, we're gonna put a whole bunch of like, like Grim Reapers and stuff, right? Um, all over the place, and witches, and like it's gonna be dark with this like Victorian style stuff. I was just, but I couldn't go in. And it's in this beautiful, like in the middle, there's like a bar on one side, a restaurant, and then there's like a little fountain with seating around it, and then there's the cafe itself, which is like in the back. So then that way it can have natural light coming in just through the stained glass windows. So then it really adds to the ambiance. Like they really thought it out. They really thought it out. So I like that.
People realize. Even Josephus, writing 60 years later, would not have understood Christianity to be what we know today. But let's start with the basics. Jesus is just a Frenchified version of the Greek rendering of Joshua. We know virtually nothing about Jesus' life before his ministry, but we can draw clues from the Gospels, especially the partially lost Gospel according to Thomas. One thing that is routinely emphasized is that Jesus was, like all other messianic claimants of the time, a direct male descendant of King David.
This is super important. It is said, because remember, the reason why, and this is why you have Judas of Gamala, who's also another messianic claimant too, who pre-existed Jesus. He was around the year 6. Jesus was around the year 30. So, Shechania was said to have given power to the exilarchs. So who are the exilarchs? This is to say, once the last Judean king is gone, the other center of Jewish life has historically been Babylonia. That's why the Talmud, like the one I show here sometimes, if I have it, I don't think I have it available right now. That's why the Talmud is called HaTalmud Bavli, right? Because it comes from Babel, or Babylon, right? And so those are the exilarchs. They're the ones who, in their exile, went either to Babylonia, some of which created a sort of like a separate school within Palestine, in Yavne, where they try to create like another Sanhedrin. But again, I don't want to get too caught up in details because, again, we're trying to get through this.
Probably through the exilarch Obadiah, who passed the title on to his younger brother instead of his sons. Jesus was born during the final years of Herod the Great.
Also, by the way, sorry, just one last thing. Remember, in Jewish descent is determined is matrilineal, right? The only thing a father really gives to the son, so to speak, like status-wise, is whether they are kohanim, or a kohen, right, a priest, a Levi, or a Levite, another type of priest in the temple, or an Israel, right, like just everybody else, right? Those are the 3 castes within Judaism, right? However, like even now, if a rabbi were to ask you, like, are you Jewish, and you were to say, oh, my mom is Jewish, then they would say you're fully Jewish, right? Like, as if you have a Jewish mother, like even if she converted, but she was born Jewish, you are 100% Jewish. But most Orthodox rabbis do not recognize it if your father is Jewish. So these are where the different sects of Judaism sort of clash, because for the people that immigrate to the state of Israel, right, occupied Palestine, because they use the methodologies created. Well, really, they didn't create them like out of thin air. They based them off the Inquisition, which is why I'm like, in this chat, please don't make any Inquisition jokes. I don't like those. Um, they created like a like blood, right? Like how much heredity, based off scientific stuff, or pseudoscientific stuff, I should say. And so what you get is you get a system now where if your grandparents were Jewish, or parents, you also qualify for Israeli citizenship. Like both of my parents are Jewish, but my family in general has always been anti-Zionist. The more religious side of my family on religious grounds, and the more like politically activist side for, like solidarity purposes. Especially because we're Mexican Jews and like we're treated like shit in the United States by, the ones that the Ashkenazi Jews that were assimilated into whiteness. But anyway, so again, this is why different. But however, if you go to a Reform synagogue, sometimes they will, most of them, say it doesn't matter which half is Jewish, right? Like if you're half Jew, it doesn't matter which half is Jewish. What matters is that you're brought up Jewish, right? But anyway, my point with this being that typically descent is passed along through the mother, like who was the mother's family, and then blah blah blah, right? So when Jesus is said to be a descendant of David, it doesn't make any sense because the story goes that Joseph, his not father, right? He's not his father, right? You are not the father, right? Not to go all Maury show on this, but he did not conceive Jesus with Mary. So therefore, technically speaking, his like direct descendancy from King David wouldn't go to Jesus. Does that make sense? Like it doesn't make any sense the way how the story. This is why I keep saying that, like, if you read the Gospels, they're super, super Greek because they still try to assimilate it into how they think of things, not into necessarily how Jewish, I mean, even to this day, I mean, there are still, again, like, the chief rabbinate in Israel, sadly, that there is one. But anyway, that's not the point. The point being that they do not recognize any other type of conversion except for Orthodox ones in what is now occupied Palestine, which they call the State of Israel. Same thing too is they will not consider someone whose father is Jewish as being able to just be part of the community in general. They will tell you need to convert to Judaism, right? And go through that whole process, which if you're doing it the Orthodox way, means you have to live about a year, right? It's a little bit over a year, but you have to live in an Orthodox community. You have to keep kosher. You have to keep Shabbat. You have to, you know what I mean? It's like your whole lifestyle has to change. So, but conversions in the U.S. are very different because the largest sect of Christianity is Reform. Christianity, oh my God, look at me. Judaism, because the largest sect of Judaism is Reform. Judaism.
6 to 4 BCE, making him several years older than either the Anno Domini calendar or his popular image would suggest. You may remember that this was around the time that Herod was purging the Hasmonean dynasty, but there was no massacre of the innocents. The idea of the old Davidic dynasty as an ongoing concern wouldn't really become a thing until the rise of the Zealots a decade after Herod's death.
Again, a lot of the stuff that we are told about this time period has either been added afterwards, like after it happened, like the idea that the Jews were expelled from Palestine which isn't true. Like once they destroy Jerusalem, like once you burn down like the largest city in the country, you know what I mean? Like people have lost their homes, whatever. But most of them just move to other cities, or or a large number of them moved to Babylonia, where there already was a huge Jewish community, and some others moved to other parts of Rome, because now they had been fully, brought into the Roman Empire by then. So, like they could move around. That's why you see the communities in Al-Qahira and Cairo, or Alexandria, or in Thessaloniki, or other places in Europe, right, within the Roman Empire, getting larger Jewish communities. But it's not because they're expelled, it's because now you begin to have a migration period that was general. It wasn't like uniquely a Jewish thing. But there was no mass expulsion. In fact, the Romans did not do mass expulsions, ever.
Jesus also probably wasn't born in December, and almost certainly wasn't born in Bethlehem. Okay, let me rephrase that. He almost certainly wasn't born in Bethlehem in Judea. The Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his life, had been settled by Jews 5 centuries earlier during the time of the Persian Empire. Often.
So remember, it had only been 5 centuries that Jewish people had even begun to live, that is to say, identifiably Jewish people, right? That is to say, so this is why, like, when we're talking about history, and I bring up archaeology, anthropology, etc., I say, like, oh, well, we need to look at the context, right? We need to look at the archaeological evidence. We need to do all of this stuff. One of those things is we can tell which communities or which housing districts within a city were Jewish, because when you look through their rubbish, through where they would put their refuse collectively, you don't see things like pork bones. Like you don't see pig bones in there. You don't see, there are things that are absent where a neighboring community that, say, is Persianized Greeks, they would eat pork, but in the small Jewish community next to it, they wouldn't. So you can look at the trash site, the refuse site, and again, this is super important when it comes to like stratigraphy, because it also shows, like, over time, the more you dig down, right, if it's been used as a garbage heap for a while, you can actually find, like, at what point do you start to see a change where, like, either, let's just say, pork bones start going down in number. Like, at one point there were pig bones, and suddenly they begin to diminish in number. And does that coincide with the, like, increase of Jewish settlement, or does that mean, whatever, right? So this is why I'm saying, like, even my job, even though I focus mostly on culture, it means I still have to look at archaeology, anthropology, literature, film, like all of these other things, because of the fact that all of these things can help, answer some things.
When Jews established new towns, they named them after places in Old Judea.
I mean, think about, like, New England, right? You have Worcester, you have Cranston, you have, like, Hartford, which is technically misspelled, but, well, at least it's spelled the American way, because most Americans wouldn't pronounce Hertford, Hartford, but in England it's Hartford, like Hertfordshire. Norwich, right? Greenwich in New York, Greenwich Village, right? Boston is named after a city in Lincolnshire. So, and then the same thing in New Spain, like the land that used to be the land that consists of Jalisco, Zacatecas, and Nayarit, and Manzanillo, and Colima, were called El Reino de la Nueva Galicia, right? The Kingdom of New Galicia. So a lot of the towns there are named after places that are back in Spain, right? That's why there are places called Merida, Valladolid, Madrid, you know, Guadalajara. Like Guadalajara in Mexico is more famous than the Guadalajara just outside of Madrid in Spain. But it's like its name is derived because of the person who was from there that moved it from one bank of the river to the other, and refounded it. So they named it Guadalajara because he was from Guadalajara. But like that name Guadalajara is actually comes from Arabic, right? It's Wadi al Hira, right? A stony riverbank. So you start to see a lot of this stuff, like where the places that would otherwise have kept an indigenous name, and now, in fact, Mexico's actually done a pretty good job at, like, okay, it's called San Miguel, but then they'll put de Itzo, Itzcoatlicualco, right? Like they'll add in the indigenous name for it, right?
Such as Jaffa in Galilee, and indeed Bethlehem in Galilee, both of which sit just outside the city of Nazareth. Archaeologist Aviram Oshli believes that this is where Jesus was born.
Also, another thing too, Nazareth to this day remains a Palestinian town. I mean, within the confines of the mainland, quote unquote, of the state of Israel. But it's that's one of the large areas where, like, within where they have where you have a lot of people that that weren't caught behind the green line or whatever when they were. A lot of them moved to, like, a lot of Christians that lived in, because Christians actually made up a sizable majority in some towns, like Bethlehem, Beit Lechem, which is south of Jerusalem, initially was majority Christian. It's only now very recently become majority Muslim because, again, all of the oppression that's going on caused so many people, Christians and Muslims, to leave. And a lot of them moved to either the East Jerusalem area, which then later got annexed by the state of Israel. A lot of them also moved to other, like, Arab cities or towns that were within the Green Line borders, right? The 67 borders, and a lot of them moved to Nazareth because there it's still a heavily Christian town. So you still see the culture that would also exist in other places like Jericho, Beit Lechem, Al Khalil, or what's it called in Hebrew? Hebron, right? Like you see. Yeah, this is old, Sam. I don't like it because, like, once he, like, his more recent stuff, he starts getting too Zionisty, and I'm not a fan of that. Like, he does good short videos on Jewish history, but, like, once he becomes, like, way out and out a Zionist, I'm like, nah, like, that's where I draw the line.
Though in reality, we don't really know and probably never will. Another important note is that Jesus was a rabbi. The fact that people often refer to him in the Gospels as rabbi is often dismissed as a colloquialism. It shouldn't be.
I know.
Back during the reign of Queen Alexandra, Simon ben Shetach had presided over the creation of the...
Because, like, I've already said, I don't tolerate Zionists, like, in person. I would never let them in my home. But, like, anything that happened before his, like, Zionist turn, I think is fine. I don't know, people can critique me on that. I'm more than fine on taking that, but I just get, again, like, Rabbi Abramson's also a Zionist technically, and he does a similar thing, and his things is like an hour and a half. So this one's 9-something minutes. I don't know, like, either it's like between a rock and a hard place because so many people that do Jewish history content are Zionists. I'm the only one, that I know of personally that, like, doesn't, but
yeshivas.
Oh my gosh, Buffy, 6th anniversary on 6/6. Yes, what a lucky, lucky number. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your resubscription, Buffy. Buffy is one of the nicest and kindest people I know, and is also the designer of several of our rather of my or of this channel's emotes, and so I'm forever thankful to Buffy. Yes, those three in particular, the trans Shakespeare, Shakespeare, um, the meow, and the yes, of course, and I'm so glad that I've met people as kind as Buffy, and that they've been so supportive of my own streaming too. So
And Jesus' apparent fluency in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek suggests a proper rabbinic education. People get fixated on the carpenter thing, but almost all rabbis had day jobs or family trades, and people seem to all.
even today, even today, I know tons of rabbis that they have other jobs. Like, there are very few rabbis I know, unless they're like Hasidic and they're like really high up in the hierarchy, I guess, if you could put it that way, that can just be there handling, issues of Jewish law or teaching. But almost always it's like you either teach at a yeshiva, or you also have you also will have rabbis doing distinctly Jewish jobs, such as kosher certification for for different things, like a meat processing plant, a dairy processing plant. So then that way they can make sure that they can put the kosher symbol on it, because that's especially in the U.S. where so many things are kosher. So anyway, or they can be a mashgiach, which is where they're supervising, like, someone, like a restaurant, every day of the week, right? Like, they're there, they have to open the door, they have to make sure that all of the lettuce is clean completely with no bugs, blah blah blah. It's like a long process, but like they will be there to help the business owner do that. So, in fact, I remember back here in LA, back a few years ago, there was a place called Mexikosher, and it was the only Mexican restaurant that was like explicitly Mexican. Like, there are kosher restaurants that have like Mexican things, but this one was like a Mexican restaurant, right? That was kosher, but now it's closed. And their mashgiach literally didn't just have to open up like the door, but they also sealed it with like those like metal, almost like a garage door looking thing. Because you have to be like super careful, like you never know what could happen. Yeah, so there's just like so many. There are either those types of jobs, or a lot of them will teach, etc. Stuff like that.
Already know who he was when he began his messianic ministry. And the fact that he regularly interacted with the Pharisees at the highest levels of government strongly implies that he was one of them. And this isn't just me. In the early 20th century, Jewish historian...
Yeah, this is something that I think a lot of people don't recognize, is that like when they talk about like Pharisees and they use it in a negative, which you shouldn't do. Please, if you've used the term disparagingly, right? Like, that's technically an anti-Semitic word, but anyway, you can tell even from the general history that even the Greeks try to tell you through Jesus was shown. Yeah, that Christian anti-Semitism. Yeah, of course. And that's why it's like when I hear stuff like that, that's like like for a long time I used to be very like, oh, maybe I'm just being too sensitive, but like lately, no, like I'm gonna tell you straight up, like you need to stop. But yes, like Jesus knew other Pharisees and praises other Pharisees. In this case, Hillel the elder. Um, and so, like, he doesn't praise the Sadducees, right? So it's kind of, this is where, again, like, we need to make Jesus separate from Judaism while still having him be in Judaism. This is why this conflict occurs, right?
Shalom ben Chorin came to the same conclusion, and Father Joseph Sievers, writing for the Vatican itself, concurs. The Gospel of Luke even places an adolescent Jesus in the presence of Rabbi Hillel, and the similarities between many of Jesus' attributed sayings and those of Hillel are so common that they've kind of become a meme. But Jesus' philosophy wasn't
again, Hillel, there is a lot where we can see that there was already a huge influence of Hillel. The person, not the current named organization. All over Syria, Palestina, in particular, Heliopolis or Jerusalem, other places like that. Because of the fact that one, all of the different, again, remember, while there was a central temple, there were other like rabbinical courts and schools all over the place, right? That's why Babylonia is such a huge deal. Why the Golden Triangle in between Speyer, Mainz, and Worms in Germany is like super important. I mean, that's where Rashi's yeshiva, famous biblical commentator there. Right, so like this is the thing. It's like there's all of this discussion of different ideas happening all over the place, of Hillel's ideas and everything, which is why someone who lives in what is technically a different, I guess it's like Judea would be England and like Galilee would be like Wales, right? Like they're not the same, but they are connected in some way, right? I mean, that's probably the best. I mean, I don't know if that's a good comparison, but anyway.
Only that of a peace and love Hillelist. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. That's zealot talk. The zealots, which I discussed in the previous episode, were the rising stars of Galilean politics throughout Jesus' life, and had first promoted the concept of messianic prophecy. Most of the other messianic claimants in the first century were zealots, as was at least one of Jesus' apostles. In 30 CE, Jesus went to be ritually immersed by John the Baptist before starting his own ministry in Capernaum, just north of the new capital Tiberias. Over the next 3 years, Jesus gained a following as a messianic claimant and a faithful.
Buffy.
Some of Jesus' followers even came up to...
Thank you so much, Buffy. Thank you so much for the Tier 1 subscription to DJ Che. Or Hi. Is it Hi? Or is it Che? Thank you so much, Buffy. Wow, we're already at 2 out of 5. That's great. 40% already. Yeah, thank you. Now you don't have to watch any more weird ads.
To the Galilee from Jerusalem to see him. Around the same time.
Okay, so this is a really interesting thing that I can't remember the article, but I'm just gonna bring it up really briefly. So, you see this orange thing right here? There's like an orange, and then it's within like a bigger box, and then here's this like even bigger box. Well, that's the Temple Mount. The orange thing is the Holy of Holies, which is why the Western Wall, which is just on the other side of this, is seen as so important. But that actual wall is just a regular city wall. It actually is not the wall that is here. It's just another divisionary wall. Anyway, that's not the point. But if you go to the Muslim quarter, that's where they have the Via Dolorosa, right, which is supposedly the route that Jesus walks, right, with the cross, right, hence Via Dolorosa, right, the painful road. Some historians have said that actually there's no that the place that they're describing, because it was described after the fact and not in Palestine, actually went the other way. So people go make a procession every year, like on Easter, where they go westward, and they're like, if you read the like, if you know where that what they're describing, they would have taken it the other direction. Like that would have been the way to Golgotha, not this way. This way takes you to something else. I can't, but again, I can't remember what like. Again, I don't want to say like, oh, I know, I don't. I just remember reading from some historians. It was like 3 historians that had done like, already renowned for all of their work, in biblical history. And one of them in particular stressed that the Via Dolorosa actually is supposed to go the other way around, and that they were like, should we tell, if we tell the Israel Antiquities Authority, would they do anything? Probably not, because it's already established that you walk. Like, it's already established that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right, which is in the Christian quarter, down La Via Dolorosa, that's the tomb, right, that they have like inside like this little building, and they said that that's the cave that later they built up around where Jesus was buried. And within that church is also the space where Jesus was, purported to have been crucified and buried. So within that one church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you have like the cross site, Golgotha, supposedly, and also the cave. So that's what made historians kind of be like, it's kind of weird that they're like right next to one another, when like the area that they're talking about, where Romans tended to do this, was actually in this direction, not in this. Anyway, not that matters.
Pontius Pilate moved the Roman garrison from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Supposedly, this was just for the purpose of making winter quarters, but Jerusalem is significantly colder than Caesarea. With him, he brought...
Not only that, it is colder, but it actually can snow in Jerusalem. Or Al-Quds.
brought statues of Emperor Tiberius, a grave violation of Jewish law. When confronted by the Great Sanhedrin, Pilate ordered them to relocate their meeting place from the Hall of Hewn Stones to the Royal Stoa, the hated center of commerce and finance that cast its shadow over the temple sanctuary. But the significance of this move goes beyond pure humiliation. By moving to an area that was not off limits to non-Jews, the Sanhedrin would no longer be able to hold trials or pass laws in good faith, turning it into a rubber stamp for the Romans while maintaining...
So one thing to remember too is that, one, this is presuming that just because they were able to be in that initial room, that they were able to do it in good faith, right? One, remember there are different groups of people represented within the Sanhedrin, right? Within its 120 members. But not only that, what this isn't showing is that in front of all of these people are a whole bunch of other essentially law students, right? That can also question and can also bring into bear evidence, etc., etc. So it's like, the problem is when people focus on just this small group of people, they forget the fact that it's much larger, right? Like in terms of like commentary, but they also forget all of the rules that the Sanhedrin had, in terms of evidence, and also even in terms of when to hold a trial. Like, for example, if it were true that Jesus' trial, the Sanhedrin trial, took place that first night of Passover, that would have been impossible because the Sanhedrin, the rabbis within the Sanhedrin, and indeed the chief rabbi, right, Caiaphas, right, they wouldn't have been able to hold a Sanhedrin meeting because that's like one of the times when, because it's a Jewish holiday, right, there can be no work on the first day of Seder, right? So, and in fact, the Last Supper is a Passover Seder, hence why there's bread and wine, because that's central to a Passover Seder. Um, so in essence, the trial that's depicted, run by Caiaphas, couldn't have happened because the witnesses, the amount of witnesses is not concordant with Jewish law even back then. Two, there are no records of any such trial taking place, and if it would have been that big of a trial, they would have had those records. But most importantly, it would have happened, right? Because remember, it's the Last Supper. Then they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, right? And that's where Jesus prays. And then the Romans show up, because Judas, blah, blah, blah. So, if it's happening when it's Passover, when you can't even, you can't even eat, specific things. You can't even, and the main thing that the temple is focusing on is the Paschal sacrifice. Then the trial could not have happened, right? Like, there is no way within Jewish law that it could have been done. The only thing that makes sense is if there was a trial, it would have been the Romans that did it, who were really Greeks, but it doesn't matter. So this is one of the big issues. This is something that, like, especially Christian scholars like to just assume that because they view the Pharisees as evil, right, that, like, therefore they would have broken Jewish law. I'm not saying this is a common thing, but there's this view that, like, they were willing to break all Jewish law in order to convict Jesus of a crime. But they didn't need to do that, right? Like, the Romans already had installed their legal system there. With King Herod, he was just an adjudicant. Like, he's just someone that just rubber stamped it and said, yeah, okay, well, this will take place. But when Pontius Pilate actually moves, right, Pontius Pilatus actually moves to Jerusalem and brings the statues of the Emperor Tiberius, then we get a very different view of what is the possible implications of what's going on here. That the trial, as we know it, wouldn't have occurred because it would have happened during a Jewish holiday where it would have been illegal to do so. Another thing is that the standard of evidence that has been required for a very long time, since even like the first temple, would have required more witnesses than just Peter. And not only that, but there would have been other evidence that would have been needed to be produced. So one that couldn't have held the trial. Even if they did hold a trial, the rules of evidence are still in play, and if someone tries to abrogate that somehow, then the rest of the people that are there in the Sanhedrin chamber have the right to call them out and even expel them from the Sanhedrin. So this is why it's like it's one of those like this is why a lot of this is ex post facto conspiracy theories about the Sanhedrin, right? Because they know that they were a Jewish law court, but one that they typically didn't handle. One, they never handed down capital judgments for people that, for messianic people, for claimants of messianism. And two, there is no, like, we have we have records of court cases, like the Thursday before and then the Monday after, right? And and we know what was happening at the temple during Passover. But And it's like, there's no way Caiaphas could have been in 20 different places at once. Like, either he's entering the Holy of Holies, which is his job to do, right? Or he's in the temple to give the Paschal sacrifice, or he's holding a trial. Because trials like this didn't last like 20 minutes. It lasted a long, long time because, again, it's trying to convince the court. Like, just think of the Sanhedrin kind of like a huge jury, right? But they're all judges. Let's think of it like that, right? It's a jury of judges, so to speak. But in front of them are all these other people that also know the law too. They can call them out. The only way a trial against Jesus, again, the historical Jesus, could have occurred is if it had been a Roman trial. Because one of the things that the Romans took away immediately from the Sanhedrin were like a lot of its sentencing power, right? Like the actual like they could do religious censure, the Sanhedrin, but they could not do something like condemn someone to death, which they hardly ever did. Even now, like in order to be put in cherem, which is related to the word haram, right? Which is to be considered ostracized of the community. Like, Jesus would have had to have, I mean, again, this also ties back then. Jesus would have had to been told by three people minimum, for each time that he committed or said that thing that supposedly he was brought in for. So, like, they don't have three witnesses. They have Peter, and that's it. And they have Caiaphas, and everybody else who would have otherwise, who couldn't have been in that chamber. Why? Because exchange, like mercantile exchange, doesn't happen on the Sabbath, nor on Jewish holidays where there is no work. So, we know from the history of the time that the Sanhedrin didn't have a trial for Jesus. That if there was one, it would have been a Roman trial. But it just would have happened in Judea. So, like, this is where you really begin to get the Sanhedrin as more of a religious court only. Like, there's religious censure, right? Kind of like now. I mean, like, there are ecclesiastical courts even in the U.S. where, like, they will, kind of like almost like Catholics with confession, right? Like, okay, you have to do penance, right? Or teshuvah, as Jews say. But the power of capital conviction just never happened. So, because again, the standard of evidence is so high that it just, there's no way.
Maintaining the sanctity of the temple in order to keep the favor of the Sadducees. From this point on, Pilate would regularly move his troops to Jerusalem during the 3 pilgrimage festivals to ensure that they would not become staging grounds for an uprising. Eventually, Jesus made plans to head south and confront Pilate.
By the way, this is another thing that's an issue, is that there were, I should say, pilgrimage festivals, but this belief that Jesus would have had to have gone to Jerusalem at this time is actually not true. Like, it didn't require that, right? Like, this is why like Islam and Judaism are very similar in the following way. When you pray, right, in a shul, in a synagogue, it's supposed to be so that you're facing Jerusalem, right? Same thing in the same way how in Islam initially it was Jerusalem that they prayed towards with the Qibla. Now they face towards Makkah, right? To this day, Orthodox Jews still have, right, and that's actually why older traditional churches used to be ad orientem, right, towards the east, towards Jerusalem, right. So again, the belief that that anybody in Galilee, because see, if this were true, then why didn't everybody from Galilee go? Why just Jesus, right? Another thing too is during his travel south from the Galilee, right? He travels through the lands of the Samaritans, and it's mentioned in the Gospels. But there's only one mention, and that's of him not wanting to go into a town out of fear that there would be violent reprisals against him, or that there would be violence enacted upon him, like because the Samaritans have their own Passover festival on Ha Gerazim, which is outside of Nablus or Neapolis or Neapolis, Naples, or Nablus as they would say in Arabic, because there's no P in Arabic. So anyway, so it usually becomes a B or an F. So terms like Sharif became Sharif, stuff like that. Neapolis became Nablus, etc., etc. Anyway, there wouldn't have been any reason for all this kind of reminds me of the census, even very religious biblical Christians will be like, yeah, the census story doesn't make sense. Like the Romans did not do a census because if they would have done of their whole empire, as it says in the Gospels, then why aren't there? I mean, the Romans. We have Roman documents, right? We have Roman documents from all of their provinces, all of their stuff, because they were the hegemonic power, right? They were the ones that called the shots, not the people who they had marginalized and imprisoned within the prison house of nations that was the Roman Empire. So no such census took place, so we know there was no need to go to Beit Lehem, right? The one in Judea. And then this too, there was no need necessarily to go to Jerusalem. And the one time he does go is when he goes to die, right? So that's what makes, it's like this is a necessity in order to make the story work. Again, looking at it solely through a historical lens. I have nothing against people that believe this, nothing at all. Trust me, nothing at all. But these are some of the gaping holes that exist within the story, right? The history of Jesus and Christianity that don't technically make any sense. Like, again, he would have been in Galilee. There wouldn't have been the need to make a pilgrimage festival or to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. That would have been his choice, but it wouldn't have been a requirement. And then two, at least not in the way how people think of Mecca, right, where you want to go at least once in your life, etc. I mean, even my grandparents wanted to see Jerusalem once, before they passed, right? But because they're anti-Zionists, they were like, we can't go. Like, we literally cannot go. Anyway, that's a whole different story. But, so, would it have been necessary to go to Jerusalem? No. And why is it that we don't get any reference to Jesus from the Samaritans, right? Who are in this northern part of what is called Judea, but this is Shomron, right? Samaria. Again, you get one passing reference, and that's it. So he's going through an entire region where the people are related to the Jewish people, right? They would be like our first cousins, if not brothers or sisters, first siblings, right? Because they have their own Torah, they have their own tradition. They have instead of Ha Moriah, right, or the Temple Mount, they seeing as that is holy, they see Ha Gerazim as holy, and that's where they do their Paschal sacrifice, etc. So it's clearly two people groups that that have some theological differences, but generally speaking it's very similar. And so instead you have this he just arrives in Jerusalem. There's no suddenly he stops preaching, suddenly he stops, you know what I mean? It's Jesus and everything else that he does, it's he'll take his time, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna stop here to do some preaching. The one time he sprints, essentially, is when he goes to pass away, right? To be unalived by the Romans. Like, that kind of doesn't make sense, right? Again, why even leave this province or this area, Galilee, when going to Capernaum would have been sufficient?
Pilate directly. During Passover of 33 CE, Jesus entered the temple complex through the Golden Gate and upended the stalls of the money changers in the royal stoa, for which he was questioned privately by the masked members of the Great Sanhedrin before attending a Seder with his disciples on Mount Zion, the Last Supper. Over the coming days, Jesus was arrested for treason and tried by the Sanhedrin. The Nasi Gamliel the elder voted to acquit Jesus, as did the rest of the house of Hillel, but in this matter they were outnumbered by the other parties, who voted to convict in fear of Pilate. Although tradition dictates that Jesus was then held in the Antonia fortress, scholars now believe he was kept in the Praetorium, not far from Golgotha, where he was crucified by the Roman garrison. 3 days later, of course, Jesus' apostles proclaimed that he had been resurrected.
Okay.
One day.
So that's now that he mentioned the Praetorium, that the Via Dolorosa assumes he was held here at the Antonia Fortress and went this way. But if he was held here, then he would have gone, like, this way. Right? So the Via Dolorosa should actually be going through the Christian quarter. Yeah, through the Christian quarter, sort of, I guess, going in between the Christian and Muslim quarter and going up to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Not be going across the Muslim one, but what can you do?
A return.
Hi, Gino Rose. How are you? Thank you so much for coming to the stream today. I hope you're enjoying all of the history stuff we're watching. We're talking about sects.
And thus began Christianity. In accordance with Jesus' will, the Apostle Peter took up leadership of the ministry. Immediately.
Okay, I always had a question, and I don't know if it's like I've heard people use the term will in both like a legal document sense and also just like general, like, this is what he wanted to do. And I'm like, do Christians, like the ones that say that there was like a physical document, like, where is that document? Oh, thank you so much, Gina Rose. I appreciate it. Also, again, if you'd like to subscribe, please. I encourage everybody if they so wish, but you're not obliged, of course. Perhaps someone else will give you a gift sub, or you can also park your Twitch, your Amazon Prime subscription here, if you want to, if I'm the streamer you would like to do that with. But if not, again, you can always help me with my research by helping down there. There should be a thing, yeah. Jews and Jewish Identity in Latin America. Definitely a book that I need for my research. If you'd like to help out, you don't have to pay for the whole thing, but anything helps. And there are other books too that are on there that are super, super helpful, as well as stuff for, like, if you want to get stuff for my puppies. But, like, I would say that primarily the books I need for research are by far the most important, especially right now, because literally I obviously am not going to say where which university's library, but to not go into too much detail, essentially a whole bunch of stuff got lost, and they're just like, well, it's lost now. It's like, well, can you buy a new copy? And they're just like, it's lost. I'm like, yeah, so what are you gonna do about that? Like, are you gonna like, you know what I mean? Like, you would think that they would want to, like, replace what they lost, supposedly. But instead they're just like, no, it's lost. And I'm just like, but I need these books. And they're just like, they're lost. I know, right? I'm like, you're the library. Like, you're supposed to have, you're supposed to be the ones caring about the books. Instead, they're like, oh, try to see if you can find something else that's just as good. Like, I'm like, my subject matter is very narrow because, that's, yeah, you're like, exactly. I was all like, you're the library. Like, what's the point of you being a library if you're like, books are lost. Especially if they're not like, especially because they're academic books. Some of the books are even by one of the books. It's not on this list. I didn't put it on Throne. But one of the ones I was asking for was literally from a professor at the university, which they have like a rule, right? Like in that every bit of scholarship that any professor publishes, right? Like article, book review, book chapter, whatever, that they make it available, right? Because that adds prestige to their school, right? They didn't even have that one. They're like, oh, they wrote a book? I'm like, you literally have like a whole bunch of librarians whose whole like that are dedicated to specific departments, including the cultural studies slash history department, and you're just like, we had no idea. We had no idea that people were writing books. I'm just like, technically I'm writing one too, but but yeah, that was just like so ridiculous. Anyway. Ignore that weird stream elements thing. I'm not doing a. I was. People keep like I like there are some colleagues of mine that have been trying to get me to do like type out my notes, which I get the utility of that, but the issue is that I prefer to just take notes in the books themselves, right? Like then I can be like, oh yeah, in chapter 2 I blah blah blah, right? Or write it. But they're like, you have to, like they want to make it kind of like a policy for all faculty and staff. Like if you're gonna do note taking, like best practices is to type them up, right? And I get that, right? Like I get that. Yeah, but exactly, and that's why like a lot of the books that I have here are like books that are either I kid you not, there is a book. Again, if you would like to help me, please go to my throne. Anything you can give helps. In fact, I actually like some it like I don't think I could explain the joy that I have when I see something that a viewer got me, because it's just like I would never imagine that would ever happen, right? But yeah, I love writing in books. I take like even in this article, it's like I have highlights and everything, and I've shown like I color coordinate my highlights. Anyway, but there is a book that I need, right? And they literally only let people check it out for 24 hours. 24 hours. And then the other book that I wanted, that I'm just like, oh, I might put it on Throne later, but literally they're like, we don't borrow this book, even though there's nothing special about it. It's like any other academic book, but they kind of have this weird policy. I think it's like as a response to them losing a whole bunch of books, where they're like, oh no, not like now you have to read this book like in the library. I'm like, I'm not gonna drive all the way across LA to sit in a room, which the maximum you can even have the room for is like an hour at this point. It might be more now that it's technically summer, but you know what I mean. Like to read a book that I can't even, in this glass box, right? Like that's literally what the reading rooms feel like now, because they wanted to like redesign, make them all cool, and so I'm just like, I don't want to do that. Like I like all of the books that I've listed on there are books that I use continuously in my research, because again, like in fact later on I'm actually going to give a short lesson talking about stuff that's from my research. So anyway, that's my book rant for now.
Immediately, he was faced with questions about what this new movement really was. Was Christianity a form of Judaism? Did Jesus' teachings invalidate existing Jewish law? According to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said no. But at the same time, many of Jesus' apostles weren't Jewish.
So this is an issue that it's interesting because there are people at the time that I forget his name now, but like he wrote specifically that the Gospels were not written as they are said to have been written, because even if Peter would have lived as long as they said he did, which would have been into like the years 70 something, there's no way, like he had essentially an amanuensis, right? Or an amanuensi, right? Well, that means plural, but anyway, to sort of take down what he said. And what we know of historically is that Jesus' message, so to speak, was initially in the form of sayings gospels. So it was just quotes, right? It was only afterwards that they added in the story, right? That's why again, we're looking at this historically. That is why. So if I I do not mean to offend anybody who is religious and Christian, and trust me, that is not my object here. Um, when That's why the stories contradict each other. Like for example, the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, he's on a mount, hence the name. In the Gospel of Luke, I believe, he's in an open field, no mount at all. But they say the exact same thing. So which one is it? Right? Because they're said to be the exact same event. But you can't be on top of a mountain and then down in the valley in a field doing the same thing at the same time. Right? Like, there are these inconsistencies that show that, like, we know that the earliest gospel written was Mark, and that it was based off of the sayings gospels, right? And that that's why its story is very, very short, right? It's the shortest. It's the shortest of all the gospels, and we know that it's from Mark, right, which is to say the proto Mark source, right, and Mark, the Gospel of Mark itself, in its earliest drafts, that were then used to write the subsequent Matthew and Luke Gospels. John, the Gospel of John is it's completely different. That's why the first three are called the Synoptic Gospels, and sometimes John, the Gospel of John, is known as like either the Gnostic Gospel, which makes, I can see why they argue that, but also it's the most anti-Semitic one because it's the one most removed in both geography and time from southern Syria, like any connection with Palestine. And that's where you actually get the like calling Jews, things, particularly the cumsters and dumpsters of Jesus Christ, right? That wasn't that in some churches of the world they still haven't taken that, like said that that's wrong, right? That's not true. But the Roman Catholic Church, like, really it only really did it in 1999, but it also did it during Vatican II. But like all of the people right now that are like big and Catholic and like online, they hate Vatican II. So anyway.
And if Peter was to be the rock upon which the church was built, Christianity would have to transcend the Jewish sphere. In the year 38, Peter made the momentous decision to abandon the dietary laws of kashrut while visiting Simon the Tanner in Jaffa. Wait a second.
Oh no! Oh, so that's when he already is living. Okay. Anyway, well, he already lived there anyway. He was born there. No, he was born in America, but then he moved there when he was a kid, if I remember correctly. Like, it's like, for example, like there are other streamers on here that just were born and happen to live in Israel. My only question is, if they're Zionist or not. So if they're anti-Zionist, that's fine. but also like how far their anti-Zionism goes is really important to me, because like my family is completely like religiously, ethically, I mean, you know, like it's the reason why I usually wear a keffiyeh like almost on every stream. Ooh, wait, let me put it on this one. One thing I love about keffiyehs is that they're so versatile. Um, but the point being that that it was never a question, right? Like in fact, some historians say that because of the beginning of the Zionist movement in Germany, in particular, that like the initial anti-Zionists were Jews, like they're like because the idea hadn't gone out of German-speaking publications like the Judenstadt, or the Alte Neuland, right, by Herzl. Um, and in fact, there was a language war in Palestine about whether the official language should be German or Hebrew. Anyway, point being that, like, again, it depends on a lot of things. Like, if, like, I'm not going to blame someone for where they were born. We have no choice in that. But if you join the IDF, like, if you are willingly, you were there willing to participate, and then are willing to shill for Israel after the state of Israel afterwards, no, get out.
I live in Jaffa. Here. This is where Peter in 38 decided that Christians would not have to keep kosher. A lot of Christians would still identify as Jewish, they would be of a Jewish background, they would even continue to make sacrifices in the temple, but from this point on, Christianity was its own thing.
See, I wish that what occupied Palestine did, like we need to actually have a lockdown for COVID-19 and only be limited to 100 meters. Well, see, it's hard. See, it's hard in America because, like, if you don't live in like New York City or like in a city with that's dense, right? Like if you live in like LA where it's very spread out, like yeah, I could go to like a corner store, right? Or a liquor store. But I can't go to like I think that 100 meters away would not make it to the Mexican store. Like, well, I say the Mexican store just to because I live in a super Mexican neighborhood, so it's like um, you know what's funny is I actually know someone who, when they saw this video for the first time, and that where Aaron shows his face, or pardon me, Sam shows it, they were like super, super like, oh my gosh, and I'm just like, he's like, trust me, there's like, it doesn't matter if at the end of the day, deep down in their hearts, they're like, pro-Palestinian, genocide. I don't care what they look like.
But keeping kosher was just the tip of the
Also, like, the animated thing doesn't really look like him. Like, his hair is darker. His hair is like my hair. But, whatever.
iceberg. What about circumcision? What about keeping Saturday as the day of rest? In this endeavor, Peter found perhaps the unlikeliest ally, one of the very zealot politicians who had voted in favor of Jesus' execution, Saul of Tarsus, or Paul.
This part here is usually never even mentioned. Like, a lot of people don't even know that Paul, otherwise known as Shaul, voted for Jesus' execution, and yet essentially he was the one that developed Christianity as we have come to know it now. Like, if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't have become the world religion that it is now. It probably would have stayed much more regional, because at this point, again, assuming Peter and all of that stuff that was happening, again, as Sam mentioned, like, oh, well, some still kept kosher, Some still, circumcised, their assigned male at birth children, et cetera, right? Um, and some of them even still called themselves Jews because they didn't, at this point, it was just seen as a sect of, uh, of kind of, I almost want to compare it to like a Hasidic dynasty these days, where it's like they have their Rebbe, right, or their rabbi of rabbis. Think of it like an archbishop or like the Pope, I guess is one way to think of it, although that's not a very good comparison. Um, and so, like, they live by word of how he interprets, and his descendants interpret, his male descendants only, interpret Jewish law. So, like, that isn't unusual in Judaism. It's never been unusual. That's how Judaism has been forever, because there's no necessarily central authority. But again, once you start having this crossover to Pauline or Pauline, as sometimes it's called, Christianity, that's when you get the break, like the true, like after this you can't say that it's a sect of Judaism, right? It's although even in my own research on this topic, because it's been interesting to me, I would say that it goes even further back, but mainly because of the fact that the attributions of Greek ideas to Jesus of Nazareth start much earlier than before the absolute split, so to speak, but with Paul. So,
A year after Jesus' death, Paul became a devout Christian and made it his life's mission to make Christianity as distinct from Judaism as realistically possible.
is that in Florida? I don't That's cool. Well, I'm glad that that they're gonna have a Pride Festival in Florida in St. Petersburg. I think it's Jacksonville, that they said that, like, oh, we're not gonna have ours because of the possibility of retribution. Hi, Tapatahi. How are you? Okay. So let me explain what's going on here, right? So kashrut are the dietary laws of the Jewish people, right? They say what you can and cannot eat, and they're based off of readings, right? Like there's the one of, thou, I'm going to speak in that like Shakespearean language. Thou shalt eat only that which eateth, right? Or which eats, or which ruminates, that which ruminates and eats the cud, right? Like cows do, right? Like cows have four. Well, some people say four stomachs, but it's one stomach with four different chambers, technically speaking. But four stomachs, we'll just say four stomachs. So it's constantly like breaking down to get as much nutrition out of the grass that it's eating, right? Or the hay or whatever it might be, which is just grass anyway. Typically, hay is made out of, what's that stuff called? Anyway, that's not what's important. Another thing was there was the prohibition against eating pork, which is why I said yesterday, which is why I said earlier that, like, when you were doing archaeological digs, right? Like, and in fact, I recently went to one, but I don't want to talk about it because it's too close to home. One and two. I mean, it's in Southern California. There are like a billion going on, but this one is just, I don't know. I don't want to say exactly where I was. So I won't. And one of the things that I found very interesting was that one of the... Hi, DJ. Also, is it Chai or is it Chai or Che? Like, how do you want me to pronounce your name? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing everybody's names correctly. Was that one of the anthropologists that was on site at this... Anyway, it doesn't matter, but that was at this archaeological site said, like, oh, I'm noticing a lot of similarities between this, and he specializes in the Near East, right? Particularly, um, biblical stuff, but particularly Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, that Jordan, like that, like those four, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, like those four countries in particular, right? Like, so his scope is very narrow, right? Like, he won't go to something in Babylon. He doesn't really care about Egyptians. He does. I mean, rather, I should say, it's not like he doesn't care. It's just that that's not his area of expertise, right? His expertise is looking at like the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, right, et cetera, right? So anyway, that's beyond the point. He was talking about how there seemed to be a similar pattern of where, because of a change in climate, right, you can notice that when it becomes difficult, like he was talking about this in terms of Palestine and that part of the world, like why in Islam it's also, uh, you know, haram or not kosher to eat pork, is because that region became much more drier, and so the conditions to grow, or rather to raise pigs, actually meant that they would be at a loss. Like, most people think, oh, pigs are easy because you can just give them. Yeah, in America, where you have an overabundance of stuff and you can just, have that. But typically, most pig production, I guess, happens in places that have to have a very particular climate. So then that way they'll grow to their fullest extent, et cetera, et cetera. And the Fertile Crescent and like down into the Arabian is not the place for that. Like there is not enough food to give to pigs to grow them, and they actually destroy the environment. That's very because Palestine has historically had a lot of swamps too, so like you can't raise pigs in that type of ecosystem, etc. At least back then, right? So he was comparing it to a discovery that was made in this one, which again, this place isn't even a major site. It's like a place that like people drive past all the time. But anyway, I just don't want to be specific for reasons. And so it was interesting when he was going over that like you can see in regions like in Cappadocia, right, which is like southern Turkey or Turkey, where they, before Islamization, right, you actually have pig pork production, right? But then once you see a changing of climate, you see that less and less. But in Greece, they have pork production, but they favor it. They favor lamb. Same in Spain. They favor lamb to pork. But Spain also is a Mediterranean climate, but because it has more diversity of climate zones or biomes, that's why it's able to have like jamón serrano or jamón ibérico, right? Like famous hams, right? That are like the whole leg of a pig, right? But like serrano, right, means that it's because they grow up on the mountains. So again, they have to go. They're not grown in the valley. They have to go up into the mountains where there's more denser vegetation to grow the pigs. Anyway, so like looking at why those laws of kashrut came into being, a lot of them have to do with environmental reasons, right? This no circumcision, there has always been an issue with, like, personally, if I were to have, if I were to ever, have a partner that wanted to have children, I wouldn't be like, that's not something I would be, that is something that I would be fine with, right? Like, I would be willing to do that. I doubt it's ever going to happen, but I would never want, like, if it was going to be an actual, like, baby that's going to be, through surrogacy, I would not want what would be considered, I guess, an AMAB baby to have to go through a bris. Like, that's just not going to happen. There are alternative forms that have developed that one could be used for any gender, right? For any gender, but also for intersex babies, etc., etc. And I would never want to force the binary that was forced on me through being Jewish. And again, I used to be a Hasidic Jew, so I would not ever put that on my children. So no bris, no, things like that. Hi, October. Are you still lurking, or are you off of work? So Shabbat. So this is a weird thing that kind of so we know that this developed. Oh, that's good. I'm glad you're still lurking. Like, we know that this developed as a result of Greek thought. That is to say, Sunday cannot be Shabbat, technically speaking, in Hebrew, right? Because the word for Sunday is Yom Rishon, literally the first day, right? So it cannot be the day of rest because it's not the last day, right? Shabbat. So, because of that, like, the Greeks had, once there was the 7-day, because the Romans actually had an 8-day week at one point. But when they moved it to what is now Sunday, that's because there already was a tradition of worshiping, I want to say it was Apollo, but I could be wrong. It might have been, I think it was Apollo on Sundays. So it was making it more Greek, right? More, this is where you really start to get that Greek domination of Christianity, which it was always there, right? But this will really take, this will really become the case once you have the different churches being founded in Greek-speaking areas, right? Because again, the Gospels are written in Greek, only in Greek, and everything else is written in Greek. And Paul spoke Greek, right? And he was a Roman citizen. But in the Eastern Empire, the language that everybody spoke was Greek. Like, that was the lingua franca. Like, that's why that movie by Mel Gibson, right, The Passion of the Christ, it's technically incorrect. One, it's anti-Semitic, but two, it's incorrect because they speak Latin in that movie. But in that part of the empire, they actually spoke Greek. Like Pontius Pilatus, right? Yes, that's his name in Roman documents, but they spoke Greek. So, because that, like, it's like people can make more sense of this once the empire splits in two. That, like, oh yeah, the Eastern Roman Empire speaks Greek, the Western one speaks Latin. Well, even back then, like, again, the majority of, like, that's why when Paul says whether Jew or Greek, right? Because essentially, when the Romans, were conquering all of these lands, right? And they would also start colonies there. If they didn't already, weren't already like Pontic Greeks or Cappadocian Greeks, etc. These areas already spoke Greek, right? Like, it's only once you get to, like, even Egypt, they already spoke Greek. Even in Palestine, they already spoke Greek because of the Seleucids, right? Who, caused Hanukkah, right? So anyway. So when they changed it, they say that has to do with, like, again, the Roman week ends, or like in their conception, it should be on Sunday, because that's during the time of the worship of Apollo or Jupiter. I could be wrong. Which anyway, but Shabbat, it means, in fact, in other languages, it already has the word Shabbat in it, like in Spanish, sábado, comes from the word Shabbat. Like, it's literally like there, right? Um, and so anyway, and that's also why, for example, if you do go to church, you are religious, you can go to a Saturday night service and it counts for your Sunday obligation. Because in the Mediterranean basin generally, days were counted from the night before. Like the end of the day, right, when the sun goes down, the day is over. Now it's the next day. That's how Jewish days work. And that's why all Jewish holidays start the night before. Because Jewish days go from sunset to sunset, right? That's a day. And this whole idea of like that women would cover their heads. I mean, again, that's also a very Eastern Mediterranean thing. Like covering your head was seen as a sign of respect, right? Like in the United States, it's kind of been the opposite, where like if you go to church, you're not supposed to wear a hat. But like if you go to even an Orthodox synagogue, you'll see guys sometimes even wearing like baseball caps, because covering your head in and of itself is considered to give respect, right? And so when they move it on only to women, which actually is in the Bible, it's not in the Quran, but it is in the Christian Bible. But that's not the point here, right? Like I hate when people bring that up as a kind of like, oh, look at blah blah blah. The point being that they are both responses to the cultural conditions of where they live. Like in that time, pretty much everywhere. I mean, you could even see this in Western Europe. You know, you would have people, men and women, that would be covered up like this, right? In fact, if you go to Afghanistan, you'll see a whole bunch of guys that have it like this, right? Because they're used to like having it on, taking it off, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Like it's just seen as normal, right? It's only in the West where after a while, after a certain period of time, you know, again, you have all of this 2,000-year-long tradition of Christianity, where then they begin to reduce that as well, right? Because there are like during the Germanic invasions of, or migrations as they are actually called, throughout Europe, they tended not to have women covering their heads. So that's why you'll see like in Spain, once they become very much populated by the Visigoths, that even the Roman way of dressing starts to go away. In fact, it was the Germanic tribes that introduced pants, and in fact, pants were to Western Europe, or to Europe in general, I guess. At first, pants were never a gender thing. Pants were for men or for women. The whole point is that one, it protected your skin, but also it protected you from the cold. You know, because like in Greece, it's warm all year round. So if you wear a tunic, right, and let's say let's say you do wear very thin underwear, right? Let's say usually the Greeks didn't, but let's just say when you go north to like Sweden and it's winter time, you're not gonna be having a good time. I'm just gonna put it like that. So
Possible. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The road to Christianity as a coherent concept would take decades, and Christian theology as we know it, centuries. So too would Judaism go through some unexpected shifts in fortune. The year after Peter's abandonment of Kashrut, decades of fracturing in Jewish society suddenly stopped. A new Roman emperor had restored Judea's independence. The Jews had a new king.
okay, that's enough of that. Hope that people enjoyed that, talking about the sectarianism that led to the creation of Christianity, and also to another thing too is like that I would add would be that by the way, it's 1 p.m. Just a reminder that if you would like for this stream to go on longer, you know, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, or if someone would like to gift some subs, that would be great too. Because again, I need to have 5 subs, for these streams. Otherwise, I otherwise it's very, the chances then go that I might have to stop streaming otherwise, right? Because, which is unfortunate that this is the case, but I adjunct, so once the school year is over, I'm out of a job. Even though I was working 3, now I'm out of all 3 jobs. So anyway, again, anything that you can to help me. If you want to help my research, you can help it up here. That's very much appreciated. If you would like to help me, but to extend the stream past 1 o'clock, right, or to make it go a little bit longer, possibly to like 4, which is when I typically, or 4 p.m. my time, which is when I would like to end. Again, I need to have at least 5 subs for me to do that. Otherwise, again, I'm operating at a loss essentially. So anyway, and I hate having to ask for things like this. Like, trust me, I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, but again, there's very little that I can do. Very little that I can do about that. Okay. What we're gonna do right now is
¿Sería bien que sea Bobby?
no, I'm not gonna do that one. Okay. I'm gonna do like a travel guide thing, for us to watch. And I'm just gonna let you guys like what I wanna. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna change the title to Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That is so sweet of you, October, honestly. And again, I apologize that I even have to ask. I feel so ashamed when I have to, but it's like, I don't have a job. This has to become my job for now. If I could, I would just live off of this, but, because this is much more interesting than anything else, But if you'd like to help me in other ways too, there are ways to do that. You can go to my, that's weird. Dono should work. I know Throne worked earlier. Huh. I don't know if you could do the dono for me, October. It should show up. Yeah. Okay, so I've changed the name of the stream. I want to talk about when I was in Mexico City with, and I want to just kind of have this in the background, while I sort of just talk about it. No. Yeah, it has been having a lot of issues. So, but yeah, in Mexico, Sears is still a thing. In fact, when I was there in Mexico City, one day there was like a huge storm. Like, the wind was so strong, I thought I was gonna like be blown away, literally. And in essence, yay, thank you. I wonder if technically this would be traveling. But like I said, you can ask me anything when it comes to like traveling to Mexico, Mexican history. I'm gonna let you guys, let you all actually, So I'm still working to get that out of my vocabulary. I know it's just it's such a California thing to say you guys, but I don't want to. I don't want it to remain. I don't want it to be an excuse, right? Oh yeah, everybody says it. Therefore, don't get mad at me if I say it. So what you're seeing right now, that beautiful building on the right, is the Palacio de Bellas Artes, which is like the Palace of Fine Arts, which is where they have concerts, where they have an art gallery. It's very, very beautiful. It was designed and built by an Italian architect. And it's one of the great buildings, and I say great buildings, great building projects that happened during the Porfiriato, which essentially is the last, the end of the 19th century to the turn of the 20th century, up until 1910. Mexico had one ruler, Porfirio Diaz, and so it's called El Porfiriato because he wanted to whiten Mexico, and what he meant by that is he wanted to, one, bring in European immigrants, but also two, focus instead on a Hispanicist worldview, right? Where instead of looking towards the civilizations that the Spanish built on, right, and finding inspiration there, which they would after the Mexican Revolution. Instead, everything was looking at Rome, looking at Paris, especially Paris. That's why Mexico City, if you go to it, it kind of has like a Barcelona, like if you're in the center, like the historic center, it has like a Madrid, Barcelona, Paris kind of vibe. Like lots of coffee shops, lots of like, Art Nouveau stuff, On the left, there's the Banco de Mexico. They had a museum that I wanted to go to, but they're the ones that printed that really, really cool money, the one that I've shown before, right? Let's see. I don't know if you can tell, but like that's. So I'm trying to collect all of the new, like the ones that won awards, because Mexico has won several awards when it comes to like art, the artwork on our money. And I've always felt like that it's kind of weird that like by definition America would never win because they literally have the same thing forever, right? Like they essentially haven't changed it since since they began. So but one thing about Mexico City is that it is super, super walkable. Like again, the more central you are, the more walkable it gets. And there are lots of car-free areas too. Like right there, there's also that huge tower, Torre Latinoamericano, which you can go to the top, and I think they have a restaurant. But there's also a hotel, or no, where there's like a mall, right? And it's right in front of the Palacio de Bellas Artes, that beautiful building we saw a second ago. And so they have a cafe on the top floor, and so you can sit up there and you have like a whole, at least a 270-degree view of the whole city. It's really nice. I think it's worth going because the coffee's not that bad. It's like, I think it was like 20 pesos, which is like a little bit over $1 for just like a regular like cup of coffee. Actually, I usually don't just get like cup of coffee. I get an Americano, right? So an Americano was like 25 pesos. So again, like a little bit more than $1, almost $2. Also, there's lots and lots of public transit in Mexico City. Of course, be careful with your stuff. Again, Mexico is a heavily imperialized country. So, there are people that are in distress, right, and that should be given housing and should be given education and should be given jobs and everything, but instead because the United States forced Mexico to go completely neoliberal, to to imperialize it even more. You have a lot of things that are kind of like happening like that. So that park right there is the La Alameda Central. It's famous because there's actually a painting that Diego Rivera made called like A Summer Dream, or Thoughts of a Dream of the Alameda Central. And so you can go there, and it's very beautiful. It's like the oldest park. I think it's technically the oldest park in the Americas. Like, again, using the European idea of what a park is, of course. But that's just because Mexico became a colony so quickly. In fact, in my research that I'm looking at now, it essentially says that New Spain. Oh yeah, the metro stop right there at Bellas Artes looks just like the one in Paris, for the metro. That was purposeful, because Porfirio Diaz loved French culture, and there actually was a group of Mexican elites, right? That were kind of like important in different ministries, and like the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, etc., where they wanted Mexico to become like France, whereas America wanted to be like England, right? So I think that pretty much they kind of succeeded in many ways, at least in the sense that like how the government works in Mexico, more or less, and like the legal system of Mexico more or less mirrors that of France. But besides that, obviously there's a lot of, like, in Mexico City there's a lot of different cultures, like where I like it's huge. It's a huge city, right? But like there are multiple Jewish neighborhoods that like I know of, and they have both a subway which takes you all over the city. So technically, if you live in Mexico City, you don't need a car, but you can see, that people do have cars. However, in order to keep the air quality, good, they make it so that certain cars can't drive certain days, right? Because Mexico City's in a bowl, right? That's why, like, when I went and the volcano was erupting, it's like, yeah, it's not super super close, but if it starts to erupt out, like, Mexico City, this huge, one of the largest cities on Earth, and its metro area are all trapped in this bowl, and the only way to get out is through roads. One road that goes right next to the volcano, another road that goes, up north, and one that goes out west, and so it's like, it's that's why it was kind of scary, even though there was a volcano going on. It mostly just spewed ash. When I was there, it kind of like calmed down a bit, but still, it was kind of scary because there were pictures that were published by the news there, when I was watching the news there in Mexico City, that showed that, like, yeah, there's lots of smoke and ash and everything, but if you're in the crater, like if you look at the crater, you can actually see like lava and stuff. And I thought, to me, that was so cool. I'm like, wow. But you want to know what's the funny thing, though, is that I've actually hiked to the top of a volcano and fell asleep in it, in the crater, because I was so tired. With one of, like, my ex was like, his mom was like super into hiking and stuff, and so she recommended, like, oh, you guys can go here, and we went like the most arduous route possible, and lo and behold, it was up because it's a volcano, and there's very few ways to get up there safely. And then I'm up there and, you know, I got tired and fell asleep in the crater. There was like a patch of grass, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna just sit here, and then next thing you know, I'm lying down. Next thing you know, I'm asleep. So as you can see, like, you know, people here just chilling. That's kind of what I just want to do, just chill right now. Again, if you would like to extend the stream, I do have other content that I could bring out, but I'm kind of like, you know, just chilling right now because, like I said, I need 3 more subs, 3 more subscribers, so that then we can continue on with the stream to its typical ending time of to 4 p.m. So it would be like 3 more hours of streaming, because otherwise then I'm gonna have to end the stream soon-ish. So that is the new unfortunate, you know, well, that's the new policy, right? Like, I need the stream to grow, so then that way I can survive. So, but yeah, like Mexico City's super chill. There's lots of parks. There's lots of green space. One thing I like about, oh yeah, and there's lots of people selling like elotes, homemade chips, like literally like they will get the potato and like get one of those like mandolins and like slice it a whole bunch, and they're like really thin, really salty. They're really good, but they always sell it with like chile and limon, and that's how, you know, that's how you get a lot of the good food, like that. Here, let me actually pause this for a second, and just go to chatting, because I just I don't know, I feel like I just have just a low amount of viewers anyway, so it probably would just be better to, you know, but anyway, let's see here. Okay, I think I figured out who we can raid. Why don't we raid? Okay. Let's raid. A raid message. Tell Levelhead that I will be there in chat in a minute. I just have to go get some lunch because the hummus was not enough. Hey, bye.